Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Damn Parenting, your English-speaking parenting podcast from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. As always, we are your hosts, Eva and
Maren.
And we have Naomi back with us. Hey, Naomi.
Hello.
She's back, our resident psychologist. This is kind of going to be an episode following on from our last episode where we were discussing compromise. This one is, I guess, a more scarier word, which is conflict. I think everyone in the world is going to have experience with conflict, especially our little ones in the playground when they're trying to get on the slide or when they're with a toy in daycare. It's going to happen at all stages in our life, and all we can do is learn to manage ourselves and learn to actually how to work with conflict, I guess, is the only way I could think about phrasing that. So we kind of want to delve in and I keep saying kind of, but I really want to understand conflict. I really want to empower myself with a bit more knowledge and a bit more tools and guidance, I guess, Naomi. You're our guide. I guess let's start with, how does conflict typically affect us emotionally, be it as a parent or even as a couple together?
Yeah, conflict in itself is not a bad thing. We often think it is, if you're in conflict with somebody, then that in itself is bad, but it isn't. Couples should experience conflict, do often experience conflict as parents with our child when we want different things. And just as a sort of a starting point, conflict in itself is not bad. When we think about the sort of emotional impact of conflict, we're often thinking about those big conflicts, arguments, or stonewalling, which is where ignore you for a time or not answer back, and that can feel really hurtful, and those sorts of forms of conflict, and then up to the sort of extreme violence and more kind of abusive conflicts, which I don't think we're going to touch on today, but to know that that's there in some relationships as a form of conflict. But yeah, those sort of less helpful ways of thinking about conflict, arguments, and that it can often, the impacts, I'd say, would be, things like stress and anxiety. It can be extremely stressful to be in conflict with somebody, especially if that somebody is your partner or somebody very close to you or someone you rely on in some way. There can be a big feeling of rejection, perhaps, when we're in conflict with a partner, feeling our needs and wishes and wants aren't heard or respected can feel very rejecting. Yeah, I think ultimately when there's periods of conflict, even if that's the good conflict, you can feel kind of emotionally disconnected from your partner. You can feel like you're not really on the same page. And then if that goes on for a long time or there's lots of conflict, then it can feel hard to remain connected to them. It can also, another emotional impact would be sort of, a feeling of low self-esteem, maybe feeling not quite good enough or feeling like you failed in some way if constantly in conflict with your partner. As I say, especially if it's somebody important to you, like your partner that you're at home with all the time.
That was something I was going to ask, is why do some conflicts actually feel manageable while others are feeling overwhelming or that they get out of control? Is it down to the person or is it down to the situation?
A bit of both, really. Yeah, I think there's something in understanding of couples and attachment that say that you with your partner are often having this or always having the same argument, but it just has a different sort of hat on. And that can often be how your attachment styles clash, maybe. Maybe you're somebody who in a moment of, feeling rejected, you might sort of want to go further, closer to your partner and maybe be like, no, we need to apologize, we need to sort this out, blah, blah, blah. And then they, because of their own attachment patterns, they might be wanting to withdraw. And then you've got a sort of cat and mouse chasing each other. That is a dynamic that's quite common. And then it can mean that you're very often having these same conflicts and having these same kind of outcomes of the conflict, but it might feel different each time, having the same sort of root.
It's really great what you said when you said conflict is good, because I also view conflict as something good, as in I am still emotionally connected to the topic or to my partner, because I have noticed when I give up, I'm not emotionally connected, and then it's so hard to get connected again. So conflict also to me means that I'm still emotionally invested. So that's a good thing for me. Yeah, when it doesn't come to a point where it's just exhausting and I'm in constant conflict. But I do see that as a good thing when sometimes I'm questioning, am I still invested? And when I notice it still rails me up, that I know, okay, I'm still invested. I'm still here. I'm still willing to solve this also. And you said something else. Also, I have experienced this also so much with the, how do we deal in conflict situations with someone needs space? And they even say, leave me alone. And then I'm like, but no, I need connection. I need connection. And then they say, I literally said, what else should I do other than communicating, leave me alone? And then I think it's so important when the conflict is resolved to talk about a little bit of the dynamics and why it was hard to come to a resolution again. And then I've learned so much about when my partner says, leave me alone, that I can give them the space because I know they're going to a place where they are going to calm down. And then I know they will approach me. But this is what I had to learn, because from my upbringing, it wasn't that my parents would then come and talk with me, but then I got silent treatment until I apologized for something that they did wrong. So this is like my pattern in the background. And understanding that I'm not repeating this pattern with my parents, with my partner, or with my child even, but giving them the space that they need to calm down, that they can approach me again. And this is hard because you're sitting there and like, all right, I know they're going to come back. It's all right. They're going to come back. I'm not going to be alone. They're not abandoning me. Like really sitting through this, but then knowing when you've experienced this a couple of times, all right, they are coming back. We are talking about it again. And that is something that, now I don't fear conflict so much because I know the strategies or the dynamics that are happening and adjusting to them. And then knowing that there is going to be a way forward when we are coming from the calm spaces again.
And that sounds like the difference in a good conflict versus a destructive conflict. Yeah, when we're in conflict, it can really activate our sort of child parts, this easily abandoned, rejected, maybe part of us. And it sounds like you can notice that part that gets triggered, let's say, or activated, and then be able to be, as the adult, be like, no, but I know he needs space. And actually, I could do with calming down as well before we come back to this, and be sort of aware of that dynamic, which is essential really to have that conflict when you do care about stuff, and it is important, you do need to talk about that. And sometimes that is a conflict discussion, but without the destructive part of it.
Are there actually different types of conflict in relationships? Because last week in Compromise, we spoke about like values-based. So what kind of types of conflict, I guess, would you be able to label?
Yeah, I don't know whether they have names as such, but I think I would say something around the destructive conflict, which would be, those kind of maybe repetitive fights that escalate, that nobody feels like they gain from, that maybe turn to name calling or using kind of rejecting language, or in extreme cases, throwing things, or hitting, or, pushing. These sorts of things would be a kind of extension of that. Yeah, so that would be a sort of a destructive conflict. And I don't know what I would label. I'm sure there's research out that would label the other kind of conflict, but I think I would just say as a sort of productive conflict, something that's like with the compromise, working towards a shared endpoint. Or shared endpoint might be, you say this, I say that, let's hear each other in a sort of respectful way as possible, even though you don't agree.
So in couples, obviously, if everyone was the same, it would be a pretty boring world, right? So obviously we're going to have different people. So can you explain why some people are motivated or energized to actually ensue conflict, while others, I'll raise my hand, we shut down and avoid it altogether? Is there a way, like how does the difference affect the communication during these disagreements as well? How is this even possible?
Yeah, and I'd say that would be very individual and mostly family of origin based, like whatever family you came from. Maybe there would be a family where there were lots of arguments and fighting, and for somebody that might feel very kind of familiar and normal, in fact, to fight with your partner in that way. And that might just be like, wait, this is just what we do when we have a problem. For somebody else who grew up in a really similar environment with lots of shouting, they might have been terrified by that, and they might want to avoid that at all costs. And then avoiding also that productive conflict, the conflict that is not scary and destructive, but it's, I don't want anybody to think badly of me or reject me or abandon me in some way. It wouldn't be as conscious as that, could be a motivating factor.
And if you have two people from the different sides?
Yeah, sometimes, which is common, right? Even if it's not different sides, we all have different family cultures that you grew up in. And sometimes those cultures can really clash when it comes to conflict, or how to do it well in a way that's not kind of that's not too big a difference for your partner, your conflict partner. And often you only realize that, right, by having lots of conflicts that feel destructive, feel like this is not okay, or it's going to really impact the relationship in some way. And then you can kind of, if you're willing to look at it and to work it out, you can come to a place where you could be able to have conflict a bit better, or a bit less destructively.
Speaking of which, are there signs that a conflict is manageable and productive versus it's escalated and it's just completely out of control?
again, it's not going to be a clear answer, because I think we all have different windows of tolerance, I would call, how much you can take in from your environment in a conflict or whatever before it feels overwhelming. And like in that second example, person who grew up with lots of fighting in their home and wants to avoid that, it might be that actually even just a look or an eye roll or something like that from their partner might feel like a conflict. Whereas for somebody else, you would have to be screaming and shouting from one part of the flat to the other for them to even notice that you're in a conflict. So yeah, it's really hard to say.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
So then I would be noticing it in yourself when it feels like overwhelming, or it feels like you couldn't possibly get to a productive place in the conflict. It feels like it's tipped you over the edge.
When we have those like red flags, like you said, the example you gave of the eye roll, or it reminds me of when you have red flags, and once you can identify those red flags, that's the key. Identifying red flags is the way to help you kind of process it. It's trying to explain those red flags to your partner. That's kind of the biggest struggle, I think, is to kind of say, hey, when you do this, this is like triggering me, or, you know, is there a way you can stop it? But the thing is, they don't see the impact it has on you. They don't have anything similar to it, so they don't know what you're experiencing. So is there a way that we can communicate that with them better?
I think in conflict, whether it's your partner or your boss or whoever, using those, starting from yourself and using I statements, which sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it's so important, of just like, when you roll your eyes like that, it really feels to me like I'm being rejected, and it makes me feel sad and angry, and I can't have a conversation with you about it because I feel like this, rather than, why do you always do that? I've told you I don't like it when you roll your eyes at me. And then, you know, there's a very subtle difference there, that one is likely to get somebody's defenses right up, and they'll be like, well, I don't do that, and why do you say it, blah blah blah. And the other, there might just be even just a clink slightly there, that they can say, oh yeah, well, I didn't even realize that, that's just what I do, I'm not like disrespecting you, I'm just, so you can start to make a little inroad in a change.
Something I mentioned earlier was about like emotional regulation. I think that's like required for all of us in our own different ways. But I'm just wondering, how can we all manage our emotional regulation? This is like the hardest thing, you know, as a parent for our child, but also amongst ourselves in our relationship with our partners. Is there a way that we can actually help them manage their role and we manage our role?
In a word, no. I think you are in charge of only your emotional regulation, and then that we often co-regulate with these other people around us. It's quite unlikely that you'd get somebody like blasting, shouting at someone if the other person is not shouting as well. If they're like, you know, cut off, or they're just not answering, that doesn't, most common is if you get somebody shouting, then you're matched with a shout, and then you raise and raise and raise before you explode. But emotional regulation in itself doesn't mean not getting angry or not getting sad or not getting frustrated. It means that when you experience that, you're quick, if you can, able to regulate yourself down to a place where you can talk and think and have a more productive conflict.
Okay, thanks for that, because I honestly was like, emotional regulation is you just get over it and you don't need to have a fight. So, wow, okay.
No, it's more like, let's think of an example. Yeah, I feel like I'm trying to think of what example would be. Yeah, maybe about a household task or something. When you leave your shoes in the middle of the hallway, I actually feel quite disrespected. I don't think that's your intention, but it feels like you don't really care about the fact that I want our house to look tidy. To which your partner, and that, you know, that could be an expression of anger. You could be like, hey, when you lose this, I feel like this. And then to be able to regulate yourself, to come down, to hear your partner to say like, oh, but I just came in from outside quickly. I didn't mean to leave them there. And, you know, ideally I won't do it again or whatever. And then to be able to come down to a point where you can have that conversation. And yeah, what we know about our brains when we're kind of overwhelmed or activated or having a big emotional experience is that the sort of thinking and reasoning and executive control area, we would call it, kind of goes offline. You can't do the thinking that's necessary to have a good outcome. You just end up, you're just activated and in the emotion. So part of your job in conflict is to be able to calm yourself down. Maybe that's leaving, maybe that's coming back in 30 minutes or X amount of time to have that conversation when you're more regulated, when you're less overwhelmed. Or maybe you have enough of these fights where you are overwhelmed, both of you are activated, both of you are shouting at each other or whatever, and it takes a number of those before you think, hang on, we need to do things a little bit differently.
So hard is that I was just thinking about emotional regulation while you were talking, and what I also find so hard is so I am with our child most of the time and I have to regulate myself the whole time, and we go through conflicts and I have to still help her voice her emotions and like moderate this whole thing. And I am regulating myself so much there that then conflicts with my partner escalate way quicker because I just don't have any energy anymore when I'm regulating myself. And we've all been through the three-nager phase where we've gone through conflicts with our children. They're like on another planet. And you are faced with these conflicts with your child where you really try your hardest and best and go over all your everything to make sure that you're not acting out and you're not traumatizing them and yourself. And that then little things with your partner already set you off because the emotion needs to get out somewhere. And then there's like this little tension the whole time because you're so on edge because you're constantly, and then maybe they're even in the same room. You regulate with your child, you turn to your partner, and it's like this whole thing of sometimes the emotion needs to get out. And what I did have a big burst out, but I felt like this was like the big storm. Like it had to get out. And then I felt so much calm and I said, all right, I'm sorry. I just needed to like completely let go right now because it built up so much over the day. And it was over something very minor. And my partner was like, what is happening here? I said, I'm sorry. I was like, it was just the whole day had just been building up. And also communicating this and realizing when you overreact and take responsibility for it and make sure that the other partner knows where you're coming from. Yeah, that's something that I have noticed when I became a parent that, I've never had this situation before where I needed to regulate myself so much with someone in a conflict when I do with my child that at the other end, I'm not willing to regulate myself so much, or I just can't even. Maybe I'm willing to, but I just can't. And that's this other layer. And this is something that I had to learn. Like, again, in parenting, you really meet yourself new in all these situations. And also, how do I fight? How do I go in conflict? Because now I have this whole new layer of regulating myself when I'm with my child that I never had before. So now I need to learn conflict again. And how do I get into productive conflict with my partner, knowing that they are also an adult emotionally, and learning this, then how can we then relearn the conflict as a couple?
Yeah. And there's lots of evidence that parent couples have more conflict and many things leading into that: identity change, role change, tiredness, being with your child, as you said, like having less time to do the things that make relationships easier, more kind of protective factors. All of that means that, for a time at least, you're more likely to have conflict, as well as the fact that conflict often arises over the things that you really care about, like your child's well-being or how they're eating or sleeping or whatever. So I think part of doing conflict well, if that's the phrase, is sort of expecting it, anticipating it, and accepting it when it's there, because it doesn't necessarily then feel like it's the thing that's going to break up your relationship. It's just something that's happening because of all of those factors I just said. Like, it's just quite a tough time, very tough time, an extremely tough time, let's say, being parents.
Do you know, Maren, when you just said there is like, I have to relearn conflict and like productive conflict, I think that's actually really remarkable, because it's like, I think I have to probably even learn it for the first time in my life, because I never really had it. I was always in the avoidance. So Naomi, do you have any suggestions on how we can actually learn how to be more productive with this?
Yeah. Well, firstly, kind of going very kindly with yourself, like what I said, like it's likely, at least in parenting, that you're going to have more opportunity for conflict. Having those kind of return conversations once you've had conflict to understand a bit more about each other. You know, that when you did that eye roll, I felt like this, and I didn't mean to do it. Yeah. So, when you're calm, to kind of come back. I think I often discuss with couples around having sort of rules in conflict as well. Like, it's a rule that we don't throw names at each other, or you don't say you're just like your mum when you do that, or maybe alcohol can be a big kind of it's around a lot when people have conflict. So maybe being aware of that, of just, if there's been a high conflict time for you, maybe you don't drink so much alcohol, or you think, actually, we're not going to have this conversation around school choices or something when we've been drinking. That's not going to be kind for the relationship. We'll come back to that at another time. So being sort of expectant of conflict, but also mindful of that. And I think, focusing also on your shared kind of goals as well. In parenthood, that's likely to be your child, your children. And if you're having conflict about that, it's because you both care. So you're both starting from a place of caring, even if you're coming from different areas. So sort of recognizing that and prioritizing that can be good. But it takes practice, especially if you're avoidant and you think like, it's too scary, I don't want to do that, I'd rather not. But then a sort of upshot of that is that maybe you feel like you're always sacrificing, or you never get what you need, or you can't have those important conversations. Finding ways to do that.
So let's talk about conflict resolution steps. What would be the most effective step a couple can take in that moment of frustration, anger, and conflict, and to de-escalate that, especially if both the partners are tired, if they're majorly in defense mode, if, well, son, alcohol. But I mean, it's just a case of if you're overworked, overtired, overstimulated, and especially right now in the festive season when there's so much going on, there's so much stresses. Did you get the presents? Did you get the wrapping paper? How much sellotape is left? What ways can we actually help ourselves to de-escalate the conflict?
I suppose there's a point before a conflict of not getting into a conflict in the first place.
Okay, fair place.
What kind of things can you do to help yourself if you're noticing, like you said, Maren, that you're really kind of overwhelmed from the day and you're more likely to get into a fight? Like, I can definitely relate to that. If it's been a particularly hard day or weeks or whatever, I'm primed for a conflict. And in those moments, what can you do to soothe yourself, bring yourself some calm? And that might just even be saying something like, oh God, I feel like I'm really looking for a fight today and we're going to have one soon enough, or yeah, just being able to be kind of aware of that could be really helpful. If you're in a conflict, having those sort of rules in the back of your head of how you treat each other, if somebody were to call a name or something, be able to come back and be like, hey, we don't do that. That was one of our rules. So I'm not going any further with this. I'll come back to you in a minute when you're calm. That sort of thing. Yeah, I think whilst it would be great to be able to control other people, we can't. So you can only kind of manage yourself within the conflict. So noticing how kind of dysregulated and in it you are. And for people who might be have more tendency to be kind of avoidant and conflict avoidant, they're probably still getting that fight or flight, adrenaline, fear reaction. But for one person, that might look like a fight, like, right, let's have it. I'm going to argue with you. And for somebody else, they might still be having that reaction, but in their head, they've just gone silent. They're like gone into their phone maybe, or they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about this anymore. But you're still activated. You're still very much in that fight or flight. So thinking, even if you don't want to fight, like, what does your body need to calm down?
Go to the toilet.
Go to the toilet, splash some water on your face, make a hot drink, take a minute outside, whatever it is that feels like, okay, you've calmed down.
There
you might not look angry, but
20 minutes to calm down. So really give yourself that time. And sometimes I set myself a timer on 20 minutes and then I know that I just need to give my brain time. And that's what I also do with my daughter when she's like completely out of it. I know I look at the clock, like, okay, I can approach her in 20 minutes and then she can probably hear me again, like really taking this time factor into consideration. And it's so hard because when you're in that fight mode, you want to like tag and you want to be there and like we have to find a solution now. But when you're like so railed up, and it's so important that you said this, it's freeze, fight, flight is activated. This is our reptile brain. We are not accessing all of our resources. We're not accessing our empathy and our solution solving skills. No, this is just not, our brain is not capable of doing this and understanding what state we're in, and giving ourselves those 20 minutes to gain a little bit more access to our actual brain capacity and to our skills that we have is so crucial. And knowing about this has helped me so much. Just put the timer on and then check in with myself again. Okay, can I revisit this conversation? Can I revisit this person or this situation?
You're making me feel so guilty because I'm working with Daniel Tiger's take a deep breath and count to 4. And now I have to actually do 20 minutes.
Whatever works for you. I guess what Maren's saying is it takes time to come.
Yeah, it takes
coming
time.
back might be later on in the day or another day even.
Yeah.
I don't know whether with conflict it'd probably say like, within 24 hours, come back and reassess how it feels. But yeah, and I think in that 20 minutes that you're saying, you're being aware that it's okay to care about something so much it's made you feel like this, or maybe you don't even care about it, but you're just having some conflict about it. Yeah, and then to be able to give yourself the time to think and slow down and come back round and try again.
One thing that I also wanted to throw in, because I think this is especially important for our expat community, is it is so different fighting when you are not both native speakers of a language. So I experienced this with my husband. He's American, so he speaks English. I speak good English, but when I'm really railed up, it's so hard for me to be then speaking it in English because I'm translating at the same time I'm feeling the emotions. And I also don't have the depth of vocabulary for all the emotions that I have in German. So it does help me that he does speak German also, but I notice this when I'm really railed up, I can't even speak English.
And that's because that part of your brain has gone completely offline.
Exactly.
You can't do it.
This is also so crucial to understand. If you're not speaking the same native language in a conflict, this is an added layer. And this is something that, the other partner who, when you are speaking their language, needs to acknowledge, or even if you're both not speaking, like if you're both coming from different languages and then you meet with English in the middle, that this is a factor in misunderstanding each other literally. And also sometimes I misunderstood a word where I thought, oh, this is my interpretation of the word. And then he said, no, this is like a random word. It doesn't have this meaning to it that you think it does, where I thought this is like such a big word. It has such a big thing. And then I saw it in different content, like, I thought this is like this big word and everyone's just using it. And he said, it's not a big deal. But for me, it was like the biggest insult, like the biggest thing. Like, and so understanding also that and realizing this has helped me so much in conflict when I feel like I'm not getting my point across because I'm not speaking in my native language, or vice versa, where I say, I don't understand what you're telling me. I don't know what you're trying to say to me. And this is, something that I think a lot of our listeners can, now that I'm saying this, relate to the language part of conflict when you are not in your native language.
Yeah, or indeed the cultural norms around conflict. Like, I don't know, it's a stereotype, but let's say that maybe Italians or Mediterranean countries might be more kind of expressive in their anger. And then, then if you're in a relationship with, I don't know, a Scandinavian person who is less, so sort of understanding those cultural differences and how conflict is, and then the individual differences and what it's like for you as those people, and then language and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, all that to say, it's hard to have good conflict. It is.
Yeah.
It's important, but there's many, many things kind of going against it.
So one of those elements will actually be listening. So how can parents actually improve our ability to listen to the other person, be it in the same language or opposite language, instead of automatically going into that whole defense or just reaction, I guess?
Yeah, listening is really hard because active listening involves not being distracted, putting down whatever you're doing, hearing your partner, listening to them first, and then hearing and interpreting what they're saying, letting them know that you've heard them, and then, being able to kind of put your part forward as well so that they listen and respect that. And that's really hard, especially if in conflict, when you just want to get your point across. And sometimes we can almost be waiting for somebody to stop talking so that they can hear our important point in the conflict, and then they're doing the same. You basically don't get anywhere. You're just at odds with each other. I sometimes do that in couples therapy, ask a couple to sort of literally word for word, as much as they can remember, relay an argument. And you can see in those moments, and they can see as well, they're not talking about the same thing even, or they're talking, they're just, he's going and saying this, she's saying that, but they haven't listened to each other. There's nothing in the middle to kind of connect them in those moments. And sometimes it does take a third party to see that. But I think if you're willing, you can see those things yourself if you're able to stop and actively listen to what your partner's saying.
There's a great experiment, I guess it would be, where everyone stands in a room and you just shout out your name, and you're meant to be able, I think actually one of the things is, if you know the people in the room, you shout out a color, and then someone goes, okay, what did the person to your right say? And 9 out of 10 times you actually couldn't hear because you were shouting so much that your ears basically just shut down and you can't actually tell what anyone else said around the same time. So it is one of the hardest things to do, active listening. It's a whole skill in itself.
It can also be a chance to give the other person a chance to rephrase something. That's what I do. I say, just so that I understand you correct, this is what you just said, and give the other person then the chance to be like, no, actually, I wanted to say that, or no, this was not important to me. I wanted to say that. So we've had this situation where there was something that I wanted to do, and my husband said, no, I don't want you to do that. And I said, well, just so I understand you correctly, this is this and this. And he said, no, I meant to say this. And then I said, oh, all right, then I understand. And yes, then I agree. And then yes, let's do it that way. So just like repeating it and giving the other person a chance to to rethink and revisit what they have just said, and also hear what you heard.
Kind of clarifying it. Is this what I've heard? Can I check? Because actually that in itself is a de-escalation thing, isn't it? In a conflict, to be like, hang on, are we talking about the same thing here? If we're not, then that's just going to keep escalating.
Yeah.
So that sounds like kind of an element of repairing after a fight. Is there any other elements or strategies, I guess, that can help parents repair after a fight, like additionally to this reiteration of what you've just heard?
After rapture, right?
Yeah, rupture and repair, exactly. It's the same as with your kids. It's just, if there's something you wish you hadn't said, or a tone of voice or whatever, admitting that to yourself, that we're all fallible humans that are trying their best, and sometimes we won't do the right things, and being able to say, like, look, I really didn't like the way I spoke to you, then it didn't feel good, didn't feel in line with how I want to be as your partner, and being able to say sorry, or be like, or even just think about, it might be the specifics of the conversation that you want to repair on, but even just the kind of the context, like, I don't think we really needed to even have that fight. Like, we're both tired and hungry, and how silly was that we got into that fight there, and being able to just sort of come back around and connect. Yeah, but it takes vulnerability, just like it does when we do it with the children, of just like, mommy shouted there, I'm sorry, and it's not your fault, and I'm working on not doing that.
And it takes also responsibility, vulnerability, but also responsibility of like, hey, I did this wrong, or I said this and I'm sorry, and taking the responsibility for your part of the conflict. And also something that I really have learned over years of therapy is I don't have to be always right. It's taken so much weight off my shoulders when I can just listen and be like, actually, yes, you're right. This is the better solution to this problem, and let's do it that way. And just giving into or seeing that there is another solution other than my solution, and there is another reality other than my reality, and not taking it as, oh, I'm letting them win, or like getting back into this whole mindset of winning and losing over a situation, but really like, yes, I'm not doing this alone. Exactly. So yes, you take the lead, and I agree with you, and this is the better way of doing it. And I'm glad that you said this, because I would have never thought of it that way, because I just don't. This is not my reality. And one thing that I wanted to add also to repairing is, especially this is, I think, crucial when you are in a situation where you feel like there's constant conflict and there's a lot of tension. And it's like, really, there's the moment you wake up and you just have like this constant anger. One thing that I try to do is really, okay, aside of this anger and conflict, what do I appreciate about this person? What is it that I really see that they're doing and I love about them so much? Like, really putting this aside and letting myself, having a glimpse back into seeing this part of the person, and how they take care of our daughter, or how they do this, or how they do that, or how they say that, or how they manage these kind of things, and allowing myself to see these sides of this person again is so hard when you are in this state of, I just like don't even breathe around me, but allowing myself to, like, yes, I know this is a lot, and I'm not denying it, or like I'm not saying I don't see the conflict, but just letting this little glimpse of, yes, there is all this, and also this other part is buried maybe, and I can't see it so clear, and it's not really big, but it's still there. And equally noticing if there is nothing that you can appreciate anymore, then this is also a message where you should take action. But yeah, this has helped me. I mean, we do this with our children all the time, right? I mean, as much as we get angry about them, and then they're lying there sleeping, and you're like, oh, see, I love them so much, because I can see this is beside the conflict. I love them so much. And just allowing this whole, what do I appreciate when I don't put the conflict lens, and I don't put the stress on, I don't put all this anger on, like what else is there as well?
Yeah, and taking that both and approach, you're annoying me and I love you,
and I love you,
appreciate this, can then make the less destructive conflict, because you're able to sort of, even if it feels hard, take a slightly generous approach to your partner who is trying best, who cares about something, who whatever might not be communicating it in the most helpful way for you. But
so that might be one of the tools that would be good for long-term conflict that we tend to have, reoccurring conflict, I guess. Is there any other strategies then that you can think of, especially for the reoccurring ones? So like we were already discussing, it's the fact that the default parent will, have to get the breakfast, the snack box, maybe brush the kids' teeth every single day because that's the preferred parent, or help them get dressed or do all the play dates. Is there a way that it's a case of, if there's this constant same situation, then resentment that builds up, is there a way that we can practice ourselves how to address these reoccurring conflicts that are actually coming up time and time again?
Yeah, there's this idea of attack the problem, not the person, which I always think of. The problem there is, I feel like I'm doing so many things as a default parent and it can feel really exhausting and I would like some help with X, Y, Z. And if you attack the problem, then you're more likely to come together to be like, your partner might say, hey, yeah, you're right. Like I can get into work one day a week a bit later. Let's help you with it. Or, whatever the solution might be. Attacking the person would be like, you never help. Why don't you notice that I'm doing all of these things? You're just sitting there on your phone when I'm doing the teeth, blah, blah, blah. And that is going to likely get somebody's defenses right up and they're not going to be able to avoid a conflict or find a solution or a compromise with you. So that would be one thing. And then I think just the things we've spoken about already, actively listening when there is a problem, finding, if there is a conflict, coming back when you're calm to sort of make a solution. If it's a conflict about, say that example that you just feel really exhausted and you feel like you're doing everything and you want some help, then you're not going to be able to make a plan for that help whilst you're in the middle of a fight. But you could come back around and think about it. Coming at it from with the I statements, I feel this, I'm noticing that, it makes me sad when blah, blah, blah. Yeah, those things, I think.
I think it's just a lot of work. It's constant work, and it's just constant reminding ourselves and to be gentle with ourselves, and also to find time for us.
Relationships are work, aren't they?
Yeah.
They are, especially when you're parenting with somebody you care a lot about, your family and things. And I suppose also thinking about what can sort of the step before, what can maybe avoid conflicts as a couple is, do you have enough of those sort of nice things in your day, in your diary? And by that, I mean are you being somewhat affectionate with each other? Are you giving each other a hug or a kiss when you come in? Are you saying how was your day? What did you learn? Or what did you have for lunch? Or, being inquisitive with each other. Are you finding a way to connect? Then it doesn't feel like you're just existing on these conflicts. Because also, if you haven't had moments to connect, conflict can feel kind of exciting. I think if you're you're at least getting something from each other, even if that's actually consciously far from what you want, there can be something around fights that feel kind of connecting in a destructive way sometimes. And it can be easy to get into those patterns.
Well, I mean, this is quite a lot to digest. I think I really think it went a lot more than I anticipated, because at the end of the day, there is no simple solution. There is no simple answer. It's just continuous work. And I guess this is just a reminder for everyone that we've already discussed many times about how to regulate ourselves with our children. And essentially, this is the conversation for our partners, that we're trying to regulate ourselves and to also learn about conflict. I think that's just been the biggest learning element of this episode for me, is now learning what is the conflict actually about and how to talk about it. And obviously active listening, but the reiteration, I think, is a good point as well to take away from this. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, as ever. It's always enjoyable to talk about these things.
Well,
if you are facing lots of conflict with your partner and you don't know how to communicate, then just forward them this episode with a little hint, and maybe you can start the conversation there. Or if you have a friend who you see struggling with conflict, and make sure that you forward them this episode. Also, to subscribe to our channel on Spotify, Instagram, Damn Parenting Podcast. If you have anything to add to our list of how can we fight better with each other and how can we not lose contact, then also drop us an email, damnparentingpodcast@gmail.com. We are always happy to get into the conversation with you. This is the way you can support us. Just share and like and subscribe to our channels. And of course, on our Instagram, we will give you a little cheat sheet again about this episode, where you can have a quick look about the most important things that we pointed out during this episode. And we will hear you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.